I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I move the motion standing in my name. Mr Speaker, this motion should never, ever, ever had to come before this House. Domestic and family violence is a horrific, horrendous scourge in our community. Under this Labor government, we have seen a police officer release personal details of a victim to her offender. Under this Labor government, we have seen a minister who has failed to properly implement new parole alert laws for domestic violence victims months after they passed into laws. And now, Mr Speaker, we have seen this government go one step further. Those opposite in the Labor Party think it is acceptable and appropriate to give 10 extra days, 10 extra days above normal holiday leave, 10 extra days of taxpayer-funded leave to domestic violence perpetrators. To domestic violence perpetrators. The people who are committing these heinous crimes on others in this great state. No one, I put to you, Mr Speaker, and I put to this House, not one person in their right mind would think this is acceptable.
Except the Labor Party.
Not one person should think that giving domestic violence perpetrators 10 days of taxpayer-funded leave to rehabilitate is a good idea. This leave is offensive to the victims. It is offensive to the most vulnerable of the members of our community. It is offensive to the women and the children and the men who are fleeing from domestic violence. And those opposite interject and say, well, how else do they get rehabilitated? In their own time. In their own time. That's how, member. That's how. And, Mr Speaker, this leave is offensive to Queensland taxpayers whose money is being wasted giving domestic violence offenders and perpetrators this leave. This leave, Mr Speaker, this leave is meant to be in place for domestic violence victims, for those victims to attend court, to attend counselling or to move houses due to a domestic violence situation. Mr Speaker, I take that interjection. The interjection that I am hearing from the Minister for IR over there is actually disgraceful. To think that we are talking about protecting our most vulnerable men, women and children who have been the victims of domestic violence. There is not one person in Queensland that should not stand up for the fact that we should be doing everything we can to get rid of the scourge of domestic violence across this great state. And I will continue to stand here and fight on behalf of those good people, because to think that this state of Queensland under a Labor government give these people 10 extra days is apprehensible. Mr Speaker, this is an arrogant, out-of-touch government that had to be dragged kicking and screaming to vote for tougher new domestic violence laws.
Right.
This arrogant and out-of-touch government who voted no 4 times for the LNP's tough DV laws, while 3 mothers of murdered DV victims looked on sobbing from the gallery.
Yep.
They looked on sobbing.
Shame.
And where were those Labor members?
Shameful.
They voted against it 4 times. That is what the Labor Party's record is on domestic violence victims in this state. Well, the LNP will stand up for domestic violence victims in this great state. We will not pay an extra 10 days for perpetrators to have this leave. I seek everyone in this House to vote against the leave Mr. Speaker.
Member's time has expired.
Mr. Speaker.
Order.